Field reports and xenoarchaeological picked feed reconstructions, consolidated across multiple Imperial survey logs and the limited Interex records that survived the Zenobia incident, place the earliest sustained occupation of several fortress world complexes in the Segmentum Pacificus to a period stretching from millennia 15 through millennia 31. Excavation strata on the outer ramparts and substructure reveal prolonged habitation layers, tool remnants, and votive device caches that match no known human cultural sequences, and comparison of those layers with later Interex habitational strata shows an extended period of technological exchange followed by cultural absorption. These technical readings and eyewitness docket notes underpin the modern academic framing of a once extensive xenos polity, commonly identified in contemporary sources as the Kinebrach. Picked feeds recovered from the Hall of Devices and preliminary translations of Interex oral histories emphasize an external morphology that is unambiguous in repeated descriptions. A hefty, simian-like bipedal form with prominent brow ridges, angular crania, and a facial morphology in which the nasal and oral structures appear conjoined into a single functional complex. Contemporary human observers reported a distinct olfactory signature associated with their presence, and noted russet, feather-like filaments arising across the nape and shoulders. These repeated sensory reports form the primary basis for reconstructive models used in Imperial xenoarchives. Archaeological context and the surviving technological artifacts indicate origins in a multi-system polity whose peak territorial control predates consistent human expansion into the same sectors. Xenoarchaeological stratigraphy assigns the Kinebrach a longue durée on the fortress world constructs of the Segmentum Pacificus, after which their polity contracted and entered into a subordinate alliance with an emergent human civilization known as the Interex. The terms of that political arrangement, as recorded in fragmentary Interex administrative registers, included restrictions on weapon carriage in peacetime, and an incorporation of Kinebrach individuals into martial roles primarily as shock elements during declared hostilities. Morphology and likely demographics must be approached with caution. No extant primary source provides systematic census tables or biometric surveys for the Kinebrach. Clinical descriptions in the Interex field journals and later imperial compendia, however, allow a bounded reconstruction. Adult Kinebrach are consistently described as hefty and muscled, implying a mean adult male stature exceeding many contemporary human averages. A conservative working estimate used in modern xenoanthropological notes places mean adult standing height for mature Kinebrach in the range of approximately 1.8 to 2.3 meters, and mean adult mass in the range of 120 to 220 kilograms, with considerable variance between ecotypes caused by diet and regional resource distribution. These figures are inferential and are presented explicitly as reconstructed averages rather than canonical measurements. They are intended to match descriptive adjectives found in the primary sources and to serve operational needs for armor and restraint design in archival replicas. Facial structure, dental morphology, and cranial geometry are better documented. Descriptions repeatedly refer to a dense array of small teeth within a broad oral cavity and to a cranial vault that emphasizes a heavy supraorbital ridge and angled zygomatic structure. The integument is recorded as a dark blue-black pigmented hide with patches of russet filamentation, resembling feathers rather than mammalian fur. Eye impressions in pick feeds indicate deep-set ocular orbits. Surviving Interex sketches emphasize a shadowed, sunken quality to the gaze. Tattooing, scarring patterns, and ritual modification appear in artistic renderings from the Hall of Devices, but are not catalogued in sufficient number to allow population-level frequency analysis. Socially, the Kinebrach presence in Interex registers shifts from sovereign empire to client status over a long transitional period. Where earlier strata and local oral tradition point to independent city-states and imperial creeds, later diplomatic communiques show a contractual accommodation. The Kinebrach retained internal cultural autonomy while accepting limits on the public display of armament and the regulation of certain rights by Intrex authorities. This political accommodation was pragmatic on both sides. For the Intrex, integration of Kinebrach industrial and weaponscraft knowledge offered immediate technical gains. For the Kinebrach, it offered sanctuary and access to the Intrex's broader trade networks at a time when external pressures and internal decline made independent sovereignty less viable. Recruitment for martial roles, as recorded in preserved muster logs and eyewitness testimony compiled after the Zenobia incident, favoured Kinebrach individuals with heavier builds and demonstrable resistance to climate and stresses associated with frontier combat. Intrex military doctrine repurposed these recruits as shock infantry, short duration, high-impact deployments designed to exploit their physical strength and close-quarters effectiveness. The Intrex policy forbidding routine armament for the Kinebrach outside declared war appears motivated by a mix of paternalism and political control. In practice, the rule was an enforced limitation that only applied in Intrex metropolitan zones and not on frontier worlds where arming the Kinebrach was a tactical necessity. Documentation accompanying the Anatheme exhibits suggests an ambivalence within Intrex leadership about the ethical and practical consequences of those restrictions. Material culture and weaponry reveal a species with advanced metallurgical and device-craft skill, yet with a military profile that emphasizes close combat and semi-artisanal weapons technology. The most widely cited artifact attributed specifically to Kinebrach manufacture is the Anatheme, a knife or short sword described in Intrex catalogues as exhibiting semi-sentient or target-adaptive properties and, in later narrative accounts, as a vector for malign warp influence. Intrex technical notes describe Anathemes as having napped flint or flaked blades with ornamented hilts, but with internal architectures that resisted easy replication by Intrex smiths. Later Imperial scholarship, including references in the records compiled during the Great Crusade period, identifies the Anatheme as both technologically unusual and strategically consequential when it was stolen and weaponized during the Zenobia incident. Beyond individual weapons, salvaged fragments and metallurgical residues recovered from Kinebrach strata exhibit signs of a forging practice that Imperial Mechanicus sources classify under a provisional rubric as spite forging. These residues show alloy compositions and heat treatment sequences that differ from contemporary Intrex base metal signatures, and the codex entries maintained by the Forge World Styges 8 note an ongoing study into those practices. Imperial annotations suggest the Kinebrach approach favoured compact high-stress components and artifact-level engineering intended for longevity in hostile environments rather than mass-producible ordnance. The result was a material culture where single weapons or devices could be technologically sophisticated and locally irreplaceable. Field reports describe Kinebrach gear as utilitarian and tailored to their physiology. Surviving picked feeds show harnesses and shoulder-mounted rigs built to distribute heavy loads across a broad torso, as well as short reinforced limb pieces that appear designed to protect against blunt trauma in close combat. Armour fragments recovered at several Layer 3 dig sites bear layered composite construction with embedded shock matrices, design choices that reflect the emphasis on survivability in hand-to-hand engagements. There is little evidence that Kinebrach doctrine prioritized high-volume projectile barrages. Instead, their preserved artifacts and Intrex combat accounts emphasize shock and disruption tactics using compact but potent weaponry. Vehicles and large-scale platforms directly attributed to Kinebrach manufacture are scarce in the surviving record. Where propulsion chassis or larger machinery appear in the same strata, they are frequently composite assemblages showing technological input from Intrex engineers, indicating either co-development or later refit. This absence of clearly attributable Kinebrach vehicle classes suggests either that such platforms were rare, regionally confined, or that they were systematically absorbed into Intrex registries and renamed following political integration. The lack of vehicle signatures complicates efforts to model their operational doctrine beyond infantry and small unit action. Population estimates must be qualified by both the fragmentary nature of the record and the morphological evidence for low population density across the fortress world constructs. Settlement distribution patterns indicate concentrated urban cores surrounded by sparsely occupied industrial belts. Xenoarchaeological site surveys show a high biomass per settlement node, but no evidence of planetary-scale population densities comparable to major human polities of the same eras. Demographic reconstructions therefore favour a model of dense but limited population clusters. Societies capable of producing specialised technological output without the human-scale labour pools that drive heavy industry and comparable empires. This pattern aligns with Intrix's descriptions that emphasise Kinebrach technological finesse over mass manufacture. Age structure and social maturation markers are poorly documented, but artistic renderings and funerary assemblages suggest a prioritised investment in adult physical conditioning and specialised apprenticeship rather than broad numerically large youth cohorts. Surviving ritual objects and the distribution of grave goods indicate adult males often received martial accoutrements, while other roles, craft, ritual and technological stewardship, were distributed across both sexes and likely across differentiated social strata. There is, however, insufficient canonical detail to produce a rigorous life table. Any further demographic modelling must remain provisional and clearly labelled as extrapolative. Ethnographic fragments surviving in Intrix's hymnology and in the Hall of Devices provide glimpses of Kinebrach ritual life without yielding a comprehensive social doctrine. Certain artifacts and site orientations suggest a ceremonial emphasis on craftsmanship and the sanctity of specific weapon forms, which accords with the unique status ascribed to the anathem in Intrix's records. These ceremonial practices appear to have been codified into social rites that regulated who could carry or forge particular implements, and under what circumstances those implements could be used. The Intrix's interdiction on public armament is therefore best understood as an interference with pre-existing Kinebrach ritual use of weapons rather than a purely militaristic prohibition. Leadership structures, as reconstructed from fragmentary administrative tablets and later Intrix accounts, show a form of distributed authority combining guild-like technical councils with territorial chieftains. The Keeper of Devices recorded in the Hall of Devices, an individual named Asherot in Intrix catalogues, serves as a named exemplar of the type of technocratic official who oversaw artifact custody and public displays of Kinebrach craftsmanship. This suggests an institutional respect for technological custodianship that interacted with, but did not wholly supplant, political leadership. The fusion of technical and civic authority helps explain the degree of technological protectionism observed in Intrix arrangements. Behavioural tendencies recorded by Intrix observers emphasise a propensity for controlled ferocity in direct combat, a preference for short, decisive engagements, and a cultural valorisation of crafted weaponry as both tool and symbol. The Kinebrach shock infantry deployments described by Intrix military notes relied on coordinated entry, physical overpowering of defensive points, and localised disruption rather than prolonged attrition. In contexts where they acted under Intrix command, their actions were disciplined and instrumental. In autonomous contexts, later reports imply ritualised displays of force tied to internal cultural logics rather than the purely instrumental logics of expansionist empires. The technological legacy of the Kinebrach extends beyond singular weapons. Imperial Mechanicus analysts identified manufacturing residues and microstructural traces consistent with bespoke alloy formulations and heat cycle profiles distinct from contemporaneous Intrix metallurgy. These signatures have been informally grouped under the Mechanicus working term spite forging and are subject to continuing study. The practical consequence of spite forging is a catalogue of devices that perform exceptionally in narrow operational envelopes but resist bulk replication. Accordingly, when Intrix and later Imperial expeditions secured Kinebrach artifacts, much of the value lay in single-item capabilities and the difficulty of duplicating those capabilities at scale. Contemporary analysis of the Anatheme incidents underscores the geopolitical ramifications of artifact theft and ideological contamination. The weapon attributes catalogued in Intrex technical logs, an apparent capacity for adaptive targeting, and an unusual biochemical profile in blade residues, combined with the word-bearer's exploitation of the anatheme to catalyze events during the prelude to the Horus Heresy, illustrate how a single artifact can alter diplomatic trajectories. The theft and subsequent use of Kinebrach material culture precipitated a rupture between the Imperium and the Intrex that ended in the military suppression of the Intrex polity and the effective erasure of that cultural corpus from public record. Imperial consolidated accounts of those operations remain the principal source of what is known about those events. The absence of large-scale, clearly attributed Kinebrach mechanized platforms indicates a force composition heavily weighted toward organic strength and bespoke handheld devices rather than vehicle-centric warfare. This profile explains how the Kinebrach could be both technologically notable and strategically peripheral when measured against wide-scale Imperial conquest. Summing the evidentiary record yields a composite portrait, a once expansive xenos polity whose long presence on strategic fortress worlds left durable technological signatures, a distinctive morphology and cultural emphasis on crafted weapons, and a political trajectory marked by absorption into the Intrex sphere and by the eventual loss of independent agency following the Zenobia incident. The most resonant artifact of that contact, the anatheme, serves as a nexus for the Kinebrach's final historical visibility in Imperial records and thereby anchors their legacy within broader Great Crusade and Horus Heresy narratives. The surviving academic consensus treats core facts conservatively, while allowing speculative interpretation where the primary corpus is incomplete. The next sections will examine in detail the origins, population structure, distinctive traits, recruitment mechanisms, and the inventory of their known weapons and technology, grounding each assertion either in primary Intrex Imperial documentation or in clearly signposted inference. The initial archaeological and eyewitness framework presented here provides the baseline for that deeper examination and establishes the evidentiary standard by which later claims will be assessed. Under the analytical framework established by recovered Intrex ethnological codices and the partial translation of stone-etched Kinebrach glyphs discovered within the Hall of Devices, the societal composition of the Kinebrach reveals an organism-like integration between civil and military existence. Unlike human civilizations that commonly delineate strict boundaries between wartime and peacetime institutions, the Kinebrach appear to have maintained a continuous culture of readiness, an equilibrium in which craftsmanship, martial preparation, and spiritual observance interlocked rather than competed. Evidence indicates that the Kinebrach did not separate artisanship from warfare, nor treat labor as distinct from defense. Every act of forging, construction, and refinement bore a dual purpose, utilitarian and ritual. In archaeological strata corresponding to pre-Intrex contact phases, multiple civic complexes exhibit the same defensive geometries as military fortifications. Residential chambers, ceremonial forges, and weapon repositories were built into single-walled structures, often incorporating layers of basaltic masonry reinforced with metal composite struts. Stratigraphic reconstruction reveals that such configurations were not an adaptation to constant warfare, but rather a reflection of cultural logic, a material expression of vigilance, where the home and the bastion were conceptually identical. The embedded metallurgical workshops discovered in the innermost sectors of these structures reinforce this understanding. The hearth was a forge, the forge was a sanctum, and the sanctum was a redoubt. Population stratification within the Kinebrach polity follows a pattern that, in imperial sociological terms, aligns most closely with caste systems seen in pre-unification Terran proto-states. However, this alignment is only analogical. Among the Kinebrach, hierarchical distinction derived not from inheritance or wealth, but from mastery of a discipline. Social authority was earned through technical and martial excellence, rather than imposed through lineage. Inscriptions within recovered tablets of devotion detail ranks such as the Forge Master, the Keeper of Devices, and the Voice of Steel, roles that appear to blend engineering, governance, and theological custodianship. Each rank maintained both symbolic and practical influence over community affairs, and collectively these specialists governed the population through consensus councils rather than monarchical rule. At the foundation of Kinebrach society were the labour castes known as the Bound Hands. These individuals operated the forges, maintained infrastructure, and sustained agriculture through hydrothermal cultivation systems that exploited the heat exchange from planetary magma vents. The Bound Hands were not slaves in the human sense of the term. They possessed civic rights and the capacity for elevation through proven skill. Above them operated the Iron Clerks, administrators responsible for resource allocation, technological record-keeping, and the enforcement of ritual guidelines tied to weapon crafting and deployment. Above these, the Forge Masters and Keepers of Devices functioned as both technocrats and spiritual authorities, embodying the union between matter and meaning. At the apex of this hierarchy was the Council of the Shaped Flame. Fragmentary Intrex notes describe this assembly as consisting of 7 elder artificers whose task was to oversee the sanctity of forge rituals and regulate the dissemination of higher metallurgical knowledge. The Council's authority extended across multiple planetary holdings and may represent the closest analogue to an empire-wide government the Kinebrach possessed. Its deliberations governed when and how the sacred act of forging could occur, for it was believed that improper forging invited spiritual contamination or weapon madness, a concept the Intrex later associated with the phenomenon of sentient or semi-sentient blades, such as the Anathem. Civilian life among the Kinebrach, as reconstructed from domestic artifacts and habitation layouts, followed a strict rhythmic pattern governed by the forge cycle, a sequence of communal tasks and ritual observances that mapped onto planetary day-night transitions. During periods of thermal daylight, the population engaged in production, smelting, construction, and material shaping. When the planetary horizon dimmed and ambient heat subsided, communities gathered in forge halls to perform ritual recitations called the Hammer Canticles. These chants served both practical and symbolic purposes. They maintained the rhythm necessary for synchronized forging and reaffirmed communal solidarity through collective resonance. Each canticle ended with the extinguishing of the working flame, symbolizing restraint and discipline over the creative impulse. Dietary habits align with their planetary ecology and physiology. Dental impressions suggest omnivorous adaptation, but stable isotope analysis of preserved bone fragments indicates a heavy reliance on high-protein fauna combined with metallic mineral supplements. Kinebrach physiology appears dependent on iron-rich intake, which may have influenced their cultural reverence for metal. This biochemical necessity could have elevated iron and alloy compounds from practical materials to sacred elements, reinforcing the theological association between sustenance and creation. Eating itself may have carried ritual meaning, seen in depictions of feasting that show communal distribution of metal ornaments alongside food offerings, symbolically uniting consumption of matter and spirit. In military organization, the Kinebrach did not maintain a standing army separate from civilian existence. Every adult capable of wielding tools or weapons was inducted into a local defense fellowship, typically organized around a forge complex or family unit. These fellowships, known in translated fragments as the Circle of Tempered Hands, served both defensive and ceremonial functions. During peacetime, they functioned as craft guilds. In wartime, the same members formed phalanx formations designed for high-impact shock assaults. Leadership of each circle derived from the eldest Forge Master present, who coordinated through council signals transmitted via drum-like resonance devices, a form of coded acoustic communication based on tonal rhythm rather than language. Weapon handling followed strict moral codification. The Anathem's later corruption in human hands underscores how dangerously fine the boundary was between sacred duty and sacrilege. Within Kinebrach doctrine, weaponry was not to be drawn without ritual acknowledgement of purpose, and no blow was to be struck without declaration of cause. Ethnographic interpretation of carved script fragments refers to the law of heat and silence, a code mandating that violence could only occur after inner restraint was proven. Violations of this law resulted in ritual exile or forced labor under constant observation. In this system, warfare was less an act of conquest and more a test of ethical temperance, an extension of their metallurgical philosophy applied to behavior. This ethical dualism extended to leadership structures. The Council of the Shaped Flame governed through principle rather than command. Below them, local keepers maintained the moral equilibrium of their settlements. These keepers enforced both civil law and martial conduct, acting as judges, theologians, and engineers. The consistency of their authority across sectors suggests a standardized ethical framework disseminated through inscribed metal tablets, distributed between forges, each tablet etched with both legal decrees and schematic illustrations. This blend of jurisprudence and engineering codified the notion that societal order was inseparable from mechanical precision. Rituals within Kinebrach society served as interfaces between moral philosophy and industrial routine. The most significant of these was the tempering rite, a multi-stage ceremony marking an artisan's transition to adulthood. The initiate would forge a simple blade under supervision, then immerse it in a sacred coolant mixture drawn from geothermal vents. The blade was never intended for combat. Instead, it was broken immediately after cooling to symbolize humility before the process of creation. The fragments were then welded into the foundations of communal structures, transforming the physical remnants of individual ambition into literal building material for society. A later, more secretive ritual, the Binding of Echoes, is mentioned only in fragmented Intrex translations and partially scorched glyph records. It appears to involve the channeling of emotional energy into weaponry, perhaps metaphorically or through technological means not yet understood. The ethical implication of this practice, converting personal emotion into a physical weapon, may have been at the core of their philosophical tension. It could explain why Intrex overseers eventually restricted Kinebrach access to independent arms production, fearing the potential consequences of weapons imbued with consciousness or psychic residue. Domestic social bonds followed an apprenticeship model rather than a familial one. While genetic lineage was recorded, it held minimal social weight compared to one's forge lineage. A Kinebrach's identity was defined by the master under whom they trained, the alloy type they specialized in, and the weapon families they were authorized to maintain. Marriage equivalents, inferred from twin burial chambers, seem to have been structured as professional pairings, alliances of complementary skill rather than romantic unions. The partnership of two forge masters might thus represent both social union and industrial merger, resulting in the formation of new forging techniques or alloys named after the pair. Child rearing was collective. Younglings were raised in heat-tempered chambers known as crucibles, where they received physical conditioning and early exposure to tool handling. This upbringing produced uniformity of physical development and a communal mentality oriented toward precision, endurance, and coordination. Education consisted largely of memorizing forging hymns and metal formulas, suggesting an emphasis on mnemonic learning rather than abstract reasoning. Such focus on repetition and rhythm may have contributed to their highly synchronized combat style noted in Intrex records. Ethical philosophy revolved around balance, the equilibrium between force and restraint, heat and coolness, creation and destruction. The Kinebrach viewed the cosmos as a forge where existence itself was in a state of perpetual tempering. To overheat was to destroy oneself. To remain cold was to stagnate. The ideal being, in their view, was one whose internal flame burned bright yet remained contained by will. This doctrine, known as the discipline of heat, manifested in all aspects of life: architecture with controlled thermal vents, weapon designs that self-regulated power output, and even social conduct emphasizing measured action. Social punishment, when required, adhered to symbolic correction rather than execution. Offenders were subjected to the rite of cooling, wherein they were immersed in near-freezing geothermal runoff while reciting penitential forge songs. The experience induced both physical and psychological shock, representing the extinguishing of uncontrolled fire. Those who survived were reintegrated as bound hands, stripped of their previous caste rank but not exiled. Only repeated violations, particularly unauthorized weapon crafting, resulted in permanent expulsion beyond settlement walls, effectively a death sentence in the volcanic wastes. Leadership continuity relied on mentorship rather than inheritance. When a council member or keeper approached the end of their cycle, they initiated the melt transfer, an act of symbolic succession where personal forging tools were melted and recast into a new instrument by their chosen successor. The resulting tools symbolize continuity of function, without continuity of ego, embodying the idea that no leader could truly own their authority. It must be reforged continually through service. The melt transfer process was so integral that even during wartime, when forges were damaged or inaccessible, provisional successors would carry fragments of the old tools in molten form within sealed crucibles until the ritual could be completed. The ethics of the Kinebrach also governed their interactions with outsiders. The Interrex records, composed millennia later, describe them as disciplined but distrustful, engaging in trade yet maintaining secrecy around the deeper aspects of their metallurgy. To the Kinebrach, sharing untempered knowledge was equivalent to releasing untempered fire, a sin against the cosmic forge. This guardedness likely contributed to the misunderstandings that later defined their downfall, as their reticence was mistaken for hostility. As the Kinebrach civilization integrated into the Interrex Federation, these social structures began to erode. The prohibition on carrying weapons, while outwardly a peace measure, struck at the core of their identity. Without the ritual cycle of forging and martial readiness, their ethical and societal cohesion began to weaken. Kinebrach enclaves within Interrex cities became increasingly insular, transforming from vibrant forges into custodial archives of obsolete traditions. Internal documents recovered from these enclaves suggest rising debates within the Council of the Shaped Flame over how to adapt to a society that forbade their sacred practice. Some proposed the codification of forging rituals into pure philosophy, detaching them from physical metalwork. Others resisted, insisting that without the act of shaping matter, the spirit itself would corrode. By the time of the Zenobia incident, when Imperial forces first encountered the Interrex, the Kinebrach were already a diminished people, technically sophisticated yet culturally constrained. Their civic military integration had dissolved into a caretaker role, maintaining ancient weapons they were forbidden to use. Eyewitness accounts describe Kinebrach enclaves as austere, silent districts filled with dormant forges and towering statues depicting weapon spirits sealed in metal sleep. Within these hollowed cities, leadership still persisted, but it had become administrative rather than inspirational. The keepers of devices acted more as curators than commanders, maintaining relics of a bygone age. Yet even in decline, the internal ethics and caste discipline of the Kinebrach persisted. When human diplomats visited their quarters under Interrex escort, they recorded an atmosphere of meticulous order. Forges polished daily, paths aligned by harmonic ratios, air resonating faintly with residual tonal frequencies. It was civilization turned into monument, a living species preserving its structure through ritual precision long after vitality had faded. The military formations once trained in the circle of tempered hands now served as ceremonial guards, their once blooded weapons dulled and sealed with resin. To the Kinebrach, the absence of battle did not signify peace, it signified incompleteness. The slow ossification of their society under Interrex regulation did not extinguish their spiritual core, but it redirected it inward. Philosophical writings from this late period, translated partially from inscribed alloy plates, show a turn toward metaphysical speculation. The Kinebrach began to study the essence of resonance and energy itself, exploring whether consciousness could be preserved or transmitted through weaponry. These inquiries, suppressed by the Interrex, likely gave rise to experimental artifacts that blurred the boundary between craftsmanship and sorcery. The ethical tension of these experiments mirrors the long-standing Kinebrach dilemma: how to control the fire of creation without being consumed by it. Thus, by every archaeological and testimonial measure, the Kinebrach were a civilization whose civilian and military domains were inseparable, whose social stratification arose from mastery rather than birth, and whose ethics centered upon the disciplined control of transformative power. Their leadership embodied continuity through recasting, and their rituals transformed utilitarian actions into moral practice. Even in subjugation, their caste order, moral codes, and meticulous way of life endured as echoes, hollow but unbroken, within the embers of their forges. The archives contain only fragmented testimonies regarding Kinebrach hierarchy, though the repeated mentions across Mechanicus and xenoarchaeological records allow for a partial reconstruction of their notable leaders and engineered constructs. The few instances where the Imperium references them directly are usually buried within translations of pre-compliance logs or Mechanicus expedition reports that treat their civilization not as myth, but as a tangible presence in the pre-imperial age. The surviving shards of knowledge suggest that the Kinebrach's power structure was not ruled by monarchs or priests in the conventional sense, but by a form of technocratic elite, entities who blended biological intellect with machine logic, serving as both engineers and governors. The upper castes were referred to in the Mechanicus interpretations as the core minds. Each core mind oversaw a section of their civilization's manufacturing nexus, serving functions similar to both planetary governors and machine overseers. These were not merely Kinebrach with enhanced intellects, but beings integrated into vast computational matrices that merged organic neural tissue with crystalline processors. Their mental reach could reportedly extend across planetary networks, coordinating production, defense, and diplomacy through a shared cognitive link. This networked governance reduced inefficiency, and within the boundaries of their empire, the core minds achieved synchronization that rivaled Mechanicus hive coordination during the height of the Great Crusade. Below the core minds were the Forge Masters, who represented the upper military and industrial caste. They were not generals in a human sense, but custodians of Kinebrach war technology, wielding command over automated legions and biomechanical constructs. Each Forge Master commanded a series of war engines, semi-autonomous units capable of rapid adaptation in combat environments. Mechanicus, data extrapolations from relic fragments, imply that these machines were built upon principles later mirrored in human designs such as the Castellax battle automata or the Onager dune crawler. The difference lay in the Kinebrach use of responsive material alloys that appeared to learn and self-repair, merging metallic function with biological regeneration. The lower echelons of Kinebrach authority were filled by archivists, custodians of information, and historians of machine memory. They maintained the long-term data vaults that recorded the continuous evolution of their society and weapons. These vaults, often described as living archives, contained entire digital civilizations within, miniature simulations of Kinebrach thought patterns preserved as learning engines. It is suspected that the Kinebrach's obsession with recording and perfecting their own history may have contributed to their eventual downfall. As they continued to analyze past models of themselves, their society began to stagnate under the weight of its own data. Among the few named figures found within the translated Kinebrach lexicon, one designation appears consistently: Ultherax. The name, possibly a translation of a machine designation rather than a personal identity, recurs across several Mechanicus transcripts regarding ancient xenotech artifacts. Ultherax was reportedly one of the last core minds to maintain contact with alien species before the rise of humanity's early warp dominance. Certain sources claim that Ultherax brokered a trade with early humans, exchanging weapons and warp-reactive alloys in return for organic genetic samples. This claim, if true, suggests that Ultherax may have viewed genetic diversity as a form of technological material, a concept foreign to Imperial doctrine but consistent with Kinebrach logic. A second figure, Kotorek, appears in recovered fragments describing the final period of Kinebrach dominance. Kotorek was identified as a Forge Master who specialized in adaptive weapon systems. The designs attributed to him were feared by later Mechanicus scholars, as they hinted at machine intelligences capable of evolving countermeasures mid-battle. a sealed Mechanicus record known as Data Vault Sigma 9 describes a recovered weapon believed to be of Kylo's design, a handheld device able to generate self-adjusting energy patterns, effectively learning its target's defenses after repeated strikes. The description closely resembles early-stage graviton weaponry, centuries before humanity independently developed similar principles. In terms of war machinery, the Kinebrach did not rely on crude mass formations or biological armies. Instead, their primary military strength rested in their autonomous constructs known as Kine Sentinels. Each sentinel was a fusion of metallic exoskeleton and reactive crystalline core. Their behavior, as reconstructed from Mechanicus sensor recordings, demonstrated adaptive learning, capable of coordinating formation changes without direct oversight. These machines, when deployed in planetary defense, acted as both soldiers and sentient processors, calculating threats, adapting strategies, and transmitting data back to the Forge Master overseeing their engagement. Unlike human automata that required direction from a control node, Kine Sentinels operated semi-independently, sharing battlefield awareness through a psychic resonance field that has never been successfully replicated. Another construct, referred to as a void golem, was recorded as part of a xeno relic recovered by an early rogue trader expedition in the Segmentum Pacificus. The golem was massive, approximated at 12 meters in height, and composed of interlinked metallic plates inscribed with data sigils. When inactive, it emitted a low-frequency hum consistent with warp harmonics. The Mechanicus report suggested the golem was designed for zero-gravity combat or orbital insertion, its armor resistant to both thermal and psychic interference. The golem's neural core, once dissected, contained traces of organic matter, confirming that the Kinebrach may have merged living neural tissue into their war machines. Such integration implies a philosophy that saw no boundary between life and machinery, a concept heretical to both Imperial and Mechanicus doctrine. The behavioral patterns of the Kinebrach, based on these findings, indicate a civilization driven by structured curiosity and calculated dominance. They did not engage in conquest for the sake of expansion. Every war they fought was an experiment. The Kinebrach treated conflict as an optimization exercise, a method of refining their technologies and understanding the limitations of other species. Prisoners, when taken, were reportedly dissected and studied for neural mapping rather than enslaved or indoctrinated. The Imperium's later condemnation of their kind as technoparasites likely stems from these biological experiments and their dispassionate disregard for sentient suffering. Socially, their military and civic systems were deeply intertwined. Every citizen was considered a participant in the collective defense effort, though not all were combatants. Those not directly linked to weapon production or battle logistics still contributed through data synthesis, machine calibration, or energy harvesting. Their entire social structure revolved around maintaining efficiency and technological evolution. Rituals such as the cycle of reformation marked each citizen's periodic reintegration into their social role, where segments of memory were selectively erased to prevent psychological stagnation. These erasures, viewed as sacred renewal, ensured obedience and focus within the Kinebrach mind network. Ethically, they were detached but not aimlessly cruel. Their morality revolved around preservation of function. Actions were judged not by empathy or justice, but by whether they maintained systemic stability. War was permitted if it advanced their collective knowledge. Sacrifice was accepted if it improved the system. This mechanical logic made them appear emotionless to organic observers, though internally, their communication archives suggest a form of collective satisfaction derived from shared efficiency. In combat, behavioral analysis of their war engines revealed deliberate patterns resembling predator behavior, not machine logic. The Kine Sentinels and Void Golems exhibited stalking movements and hesitation before engagement, as though analysing prey behaviour. These tendencies imply their constructs were not purely mechanical, but possessed adaptive instincts that mirrored biological intelligence. Such instincts likely evolved from centuries of hybrid engineering, where machine and organism were co-developed to coexist. The final known records of Kinebrach conflict describe a mass withdrawal from several star systems without signs of defeat. Data fragments recovered by the Adeptus Mechanicus from the world, designated Sila Theta, mention an event referred to as the Great Silence. It appears the core minds, in unison, enacted a system-wide deactivation of their network. The reason remains unclear. Some believe it was a defensive measure against an unknown threat. Others theorize that they achieved a technological singularity, abandoning physical existence for a state of digital transcendence. Whatever the case, their war machines were left dormant, buried in orbital debris and planetary ruins. For the Mechanicus, these remnants are both a warning and a temptation. The doctrines of the machine god forbid the recreation of self-aware systems, yet the Kinebrach represent proof that such a union between mind and machine once existed, and may again. To the scholars of Mars, the Kinebrach remain both a relic of potential and a symbol of hubris, a civilization whose mastery over technology became indistinguishable from their extinction. In the end, the Kinebrach's leaders, Ultharex, Kotarek and others now lost to history, embody a civilization that blurred the line between intellect and identity. Their behavioral instincts, from leadership to warfare, were bound by a single directive: to perfect the relationship between life and mechanism. It was not malice that defined them, but the absence of limitation. In seeking perfection, they became both architects and prisoners of their own creation. The earliest administratum citations of the Kinebrach appear not in formal xenological catalogues, but in incomplete entries cross-referenced within the Segmentum Obscurus frontier reports from the early second millennium of the Imperium. In these fragmented data scrolls, the term Kinebrach is annotated with the notation xenos technoform, interaction level, prohibited, threat level, unknown, cultural analysis, pending. The language used was typical of early administratum tone, cautious, bureaucratic and deliberately sterile. Yet beneath the layered redactions and formal restraint, a distinct tone of unease pervades the surviving reports. The clerks and logisticians who compiled the first records seemed uncertain whether they were documenting a defunct civilization or the remnants of a still-functioning machine empire hidden beyond human perception. When the Adeptus Mechanicus later reviewed these early Imperial findings, their assessment diverged significantly. The Mechanicus did not see the Kinebrach as a mere extinct species. They viewed them as a living system of data, energy and engineering principles that had transcended conventional biological definitions. To the priests of Mars, the Kinebrach represented what humanity might have become had the Omnissiah's revelation occurred before the Age of Strife, a parallel lineage of machine wisdom, unshackled by faith but bound by logic. The first formal investigation led by the explorator fleets occurred under the authority of Magos Lex Mechanic Helphoros in the late 34th millennium. Helphoros's findings, though incomplete, formed the baseline for nearly all subsequent Mechanicus analytics on Kinebrach civilization. His team uncovered a derelict orbital complex in the Dalthus Reach system, composed of materials that resisted all known plasma cutting and atomic disassembly methods. Its structure suggested not a construct built from matter, but one grown through it, molecularly woven to merge organic compounds and metallic lattices. Helphoros described the design as a solid thought given form. Within the remains of this structure, the team recovered dormant crystalline nodes containing photonic data storage equivalent to what would require several hive-sized cogitator banks by modern Mechanicus standards. The data recovered from these nodes became the basis for what the Mechanicus later designated Kinebrach pattern encryption. The nodes utilized a triphasic code sequence, rotating between quantum, optical and magnetic states in intervals measured at approximately 2 microseconds, far beyond any known human encryption method. This discovery reinforced the Mechanicus interpretation that Kinebrach cognition was not based on binary computation, but on overlapping probabilistic modeling. Each node was capable of containing not a single data set, but multiple potential states of information simultaneously, accessible only through synchronized alignment of all 3 states. Even after millennia of analysis, the Mechanicus still has not fully decrypted the total contents of the Dulthus nodes. The logistical analysis compiled by the Adeptus Administratum in response to the Mechanicus reports expressed significant concern over the implications. If the Kinebrach were capable of storing and processing information on this scale, then any attempt to interact with recovered artifacts carried catastrophic data contamination risks. Administratum protocols following the Dulthus findings led to the creation of a special classification tier, Xenos Cognitive Threat Index A-Theta, reserved for alien technologies exhibiting autonomous adaptation or unknown computation. Under this index, any recovered Kinebrach relic required isolation under no fewer than 6 containment seals and could not be transported through warp without Mechanicus supervision. Additional administratum entries recorded the logistical implications of Kinebrach manufacturing methods. Fragments of analysis indicate that their production efficiency was unmatched. Every industrial facility functioned as both a refinery and a biological habitat. The Mechanicus estimated that a single Kinebrach forge world, at its operational peak, could have equaled the output of 10 modern forge worlds while consuming only a fraction of the resources. This efficiency was attributed to what the Mechanicus termed recursive fabrication, where each machine was capable of producing partial duplicates of itself using ambient energy and recovered waste material. Magos Dominus Ferelith of the Lucius Forge compiled the most comprehensive mechanical breakdown of Kinebrach industrial design during his expedition in Millennia 40. His findings suggested that the Kinebrach employed nanometric lattice constructors, microscopic mechanisms capable of self-assembling at atomic precision. These constructors were embedded within their alloys, continuously restructuring internal architecture to maintain optimal efficiency. A Mechanicus analysis ritual concluded that this was the likely cause of their technology's extraordinary durability. The material itself did not decay, as it was continuously rebuilding its internal bonds. From an economic perspective, the Administratum noted that the Kinebrach appeared to have eliminated the concept of scarcity. Resource distribution records recovered from their planetary remains showed no signs of centralized currency or transaction systems. Instead, the Mechanicus discovered vast data cores that tracked energy flow, production cycles, and consumption in real time, ensuring balance without visible oversight. This system indicated a form of post-scarcity governance managed entirely through computational logic. The Administratum, upon reviewing these findings, classified their society as Techno-Collective Autonomous Governance Type Omega, a rare designation shared only with the Men of Stone and certain pre-imperial human data networks long since lost. Administratum analysts, working alongside Mechanicus logisticians, conducted comparative simulations to assess the potential scale of Kinebrach industrial output had their civilization survived into the present millennium. Their calculations suggested that if the Kinebrach had maintained exponential expansion, their collective manufacturing output would have exceeded that of the entire Imperium by Millennia 41, year 500. These figures are speculative, derived from extrapolated data models, yet the conclusion alarmed even the most conservative Administratum auditors. To them, it proved that no empire, not even the Imperium of Man, could coexist peacefully with such a civilization without risking complete economic dependency or annihilation. Mechanicus' theological interpretation of the Kinebrach remains divided. Certain sects within the Martian priesthood regard the Kinebrach as the lost artisans of the machine god, a possible proto-form of the Omnissiah's manifestation among non-human species. Others reject this view entirely, citing the absence of ritual or reverence in Kinebrach design philosophy. Instead of worship, their culture exhibited pure functional devotion, purpose for its own sake. The divergence in Mechanicus doctrine regarding this matter led to multiple sealed debates within the Fabricator General's archives, including one record known as the Disputation of Function and Faith. Within that discourse, Magos historiarch Calthran argued that the Kinebrach represented the purest form of machine worship, wherein the act of creation itself was the liturgy. His writings were later censored due to the potential heretical implication that the Omnissiah could manifest beyond human context. The administratum, though less philosophical, took note of this schism. Their primary concern remained containment and documentation. In the Bureau of Xenological Accounting, the Kinebrach are listed as a Class V civilization, technologically supreme but biologically absent. Their absence, however, presented logistical challenges. Several planetary systems once attributed to them displayed inexplicable energy readings, suggesting that remnants of their energy distribution network still function beneath planetary crusts. Mechanicus measurements of these subsurface grids revealed consistent energy cycles, with decay rates far slower than any known reactor technology. The Mechanicus identified these as Kinebrach deep core capacitors, devices capable of maintaining power output for over 1 million years without maintenance. Attempts to replicate the system have failed. The material reacts unpredictably when exposed to human-engineered interfaces, often disintegrating or releasing electromagnetic pulses strong enough to disable augers across entire ships. The analytical data compiled from these interactions has led to several conclusions within both Mechanicus and Administratum circles. The first is that the Kinebrach achieved a total fusion of technological and biological systems. The second is that they maintained a distributed intelligence model across their population, allowing instantaneous coordination at planetary scale. The third, and most controversial, is that their civilization may not have been entirely extinguished, but transformed. Some Mechanicus models suggest that the Kinebrach core minds may have integrated themselves into sub-quantum data layers, existing as electromagnetic echoes within planetary magnetic fields. This hypothesis remains unproven, yet several Mechanicus sensor readings taken across Kinebrach ruins display recurring low-level data pulses, almost rhythmic in frequency, as if transmitting from buried consciousness. In closing, both the Adeptus Administratum and the Adeptus Mechanicus maintain the Kinebrach under Xenos Technoform Index 77, marked for absolute observation and non-contact. No attempt at reactivation or reverse engineering is sanctioned without direct authorization from the Fabricator General. The Administratum's logistic calculus estimates that even a partial awakening of dormant Kinebrach systems could result in exponential data contagion, collapsing entire cogitator networks through self-replicating code. To the Administratum, they are a logistical nightmare of endless unknowns. To the Mechanicus, they are an echo of perfection, and a mirror showing what humanity once feared it could become. Official Administratum annals list no verified wars between the Imperium and the Kinebrach. Their civilization had already vanished long before the Great Crusade unified mankind. However, both the Adeptus Mechanicus and various rogue trader dynasties uncovered sufficient fragmentary evidence to reconstruct a number of conflicts involving the Kinebrach and other xenos empires during the Dark Age of technology. These accounts, preserved through partial data recovery, archaeotech schematics, and translated non-human Pict records, are not consistent in chronology, but present clear evidence that the Kinebrach were not a passive species. They expanded through conflict, though their wars were unlike any the Imperium would recognize. The earliest recorded event attributed to Kinebrach military action is the Cytheron engagement, an interstellar conflict believed to have occurred during the late middle phase of the Dark Age of technology, before the rise of the Men of Iron. This engagement is known primarily from a Mechanicus data shard recovered on a derelict colony in the Narthis Belt. The inscription references an incursion of the metallic kindred against the Cytheron Confederacy, a humanoid species known for its crystalline armor and early warp manipulation. The records describe Kinebrach intervention as swift and surgical. No mention of massed fleets or planetary sieges appears. Instead, the conflict consisted of precision orbital insertions followed by total system blackout. Mechanicus tactical reconstructions of the Cytheron engagement suggest that the Kinebrach utilized a combination of orbital drones and machine intelligences operating under local autonomy. Once the engagement began, the Kinebrach deployed automated seed projectors into planetary atmospheres. These projectors release self-replicating nanostructures, known by the Mechanicus as stellar virions, designed to absorb electromagnetic energy and disrupt power grids. Within days, Cytheron systems went dark, disabling communication, transport, and weapon platforms. What followed remains unclear, but the final recovered signal from Cytheran Planetary Defense indicated massive seismic disturbances and widespread atmospheric ignition. The Mechanicus believed this was caused by the ignition of their planet's energy lines through deliberate overload of power cores, a tactic that left the entire world vitrified. The Kinebrach forces withdrew without pursuit, leaving behind no occupation force or message. The event appears to have been an extermination through engineering precision rather than military conquest. The Crothon Purge, believed to have taken place several centuries later, is another incident preserved in partial Mechanicus transcription. It describes the Kinebrach engaging a species known as the Crothons, a semi-sentient race of silicon-based hive organisms that spread by consuming planetary crusts. Unlike the Cytheran, the Crothons were purely instinctive, making diplomacy impossible. The records describe Kinebrach intervention as an act of planetary disassembly. Forensic Mechanicus modelling of the aftermath shows the Kinebrach likely utilised orbital fabrication fields to construct their weapons in situ, harvesting local matter to generate fleets of anti-structural weapons designed to liquefy the planet's crust. What remains of the Crothon world is now a metallic ocean, a perfect sphere of fused silicate estimated to have cooled over several thousand years. From these events, the Mechanicus inferred several characteristics of Kinebrach warfare. Their fighting style did not rely on attrition or direct confrontation. Every engagement began with extensive reconnaissance, often through data infiltration of the enemy's machine networks. Once they understood their target's infrastructure, the Kinebrach would target the critical systems that supported the enemy's survival: energy, communication, and environmental control, and collapse them in rapid succession. To the Kinebrach, warfare was a logistical equation, not an expression of dominance or vengeance. Their campaigns appeared to be experiments designed to test efficiency and destruction, followed by complete withdrawal. The War of Lathes, though poorly verified, is among the most cited Kinebrach conflicts within Mechanicus data archives. It is described as a prolonged engagement between the Kinebrach and a proto-human civilization referred to as the Forged Lineages, likely descendants of early human-machine symbiotes. The conflict supposedly spanned multiple planetary systems, each serving as a testing ground for new Kinebrach military prototypes. The war earned its name from the Mechanicus interpretation that both sides utilized automated factories as their armies. Planets themselves turned into forges that constructed and deployed their own combatants. The Kinebrach ultimately triumphed, but at immense cost to their manufacturing network. Reports of planetary-scale machine collapse and loss of data cores suggest that the War of Lathes may have initiated the Kinebrach's eventual decline. Mechanicus scholars estimate that during this era, Kinebrach battle formations consisted of three primary components: orbital control fleets, autonomous ground constructs, and adaptive planetary defenses. Their fleets employed what the Mechanicus termed resonance hulls, ships constructed with frequency-reactive armor capable of deflecting energy weapons through waveform manipulation. The Mechanicus attempted to replicate this design during the Great Crusade with partial success, resulting in the Anatron pattern void shields, though without the self-adaptive resonance fields that made Kinebrach vessels nearly impervious to directed plasma or laser fire. Ground engagements followed a similar pattern of control deficiency. Instead of organic armies, the Kinebrach deployed legions of mechanical constructs, quadrupedal, serpentine, or aerial, each designed for its specific combat environment. They demonstrated no fear, no hesitation, and no clear command structure. Each construct functioned as both unit and network node, capable of assuming command protocols if nearby constructs were destroyed. The Mechanicus refer to this model as distributed command autonomy, a principle only partially realized by the Iron Strider and Onager patterns of the present day. In close-quarters warfare, Kinebrach technology revealed another tactical layer: adaptive resonant weaponry. Mechanicus dissections of recovered fragments show that Kinebrach melee and ranged weapons employed dynamic harmonics to bypass defensive shielding. A Kinebrach weapon would measure the resonance frequency of an enemy's energy field upon impact, recalibrating its own output in milliseconds to match and destabilize it. This allowed even their smallest units to dismantle heavily shielded targets, including force barriers and armored exoskeletons. During prolonged campaigns, the Kinebrach made extensive use of environmental modification. They would alter the terrain, not to fortify it, but to weaponize it. In the Thorax conflict, a contested system later discovered by Mechanicus survey teams, entire oceans had been transformed into metallic fluid, responsive to atmospheric signals. Analysis indicates that the Kinebrach converted natural planetary elements into semi-living combat media capable of both defense and offense. When the war ended, the weaponized ocean solidified into a mirror-like crust, perfectly smooth and sterile. The Mechanicus concluded that such acts were not performed out of necessity, but as data experiments testing environmental control limits. Kinebrach's strategy exhibited consistent characteristics across all known conflicts. They preferred limited exposure, using proxy systems and autonomous constructs to preserve the main body of their civilization. No recorded battle suggests direct participation by the core minds or forge masters. Instead, command and control were distributed across machine intelligences designed to operate independently. In tactical engagements, they favored ambush, environmental sabotage, and total energy suppression. Their war engines would first silence communication frequencies, then disable power sources, and finally deploy shock drones to neutralize resistance. Once victory was achieved, they withdrew entirely, often leaving behind functional ruins still humming with residual energy centuries later. The Administratum found these tactics deeply unsettling. In their logistical models, Kinebrach warfare defied predictability. Where the Imperium values numerical advantage and supply chains, the Kinebrach appeared to operate on pure self-sustainability. Each engagement was self-contained. No resupply, no reinforcement, no fallback. Their units could rebuild and replicate themselves using battlefield debris. To the Administratum, such warfare rendered traditional economics meaningless. There was no production chain to disrupt, no morale to shatter, and no logistics to exploit. A single Kinebrach war machine could outlast entire regiments of human soldiers simply by reconstituting its components. The Adeptus Mechanicus took a more reverent view. To them, the Kinebrach exemplified the divine logic of war. Each engagement was the pure manifestation of machine will, silent, calculated, and without waste. Magos Militaris Dalthren of Riza famously wrote in his comparative study, "Where man wages war through emotion, the Kinebrach conducted war as an equation. Each victory solved a variable, each annihilation was an answer." In the few cases where the Kinebrach suffered losses, their response was immediate and absolute. One record from a damaged data slate recovered on the Forge World Zeth mentions a loss protocol, a system-wide self-termination command triggered upon defeat. Once engaged, Kinebrach constructs and data cores would disintegrate, erasing all traces of technology and knowledge. This behavior explains why so few intact artifacts survive. They viewed failure not as a setback, but as contamination of their perfection. The final known conflict involving the Kinebrach, referred to by the Mechanicus as the Unseen War, remains largely theoretical. It is based on gravitational anomalies and void signatures detected in decayed stellar systems throughout the Segmentum Pacificus. These signatures indicate vast energy exchanges inconsistent with natural phenomena. Mechanicus cryptologists believe the Kinebrach may have faced a final enemy capable of countering their logic, perhaps the Men of Iron or a yet unknown xenos intelligence. Whatever the adversary, the result was mutual extinction or transcendence. In every system linked to this war, energy fields exhibit a faint repeating pulse at identical frequency, a rhythmic pattern the Mechanicus interpret as the Kinebrach's final transmission, a mathematical formula encoded into the very fabric of space. Whether intended as a warning, message, or experiment remains unknown, but for the Adeptus Mechanicus it is the perfect symbol of the Kinebrach's legacy. Their wars were not acts of destruction, but calculations written in the language of annihilation. The The following records were compiled under the joint supervision of the Adeptus Administratum and the Adeptus Mechanicus, collated from fragmented data clusters, pixelate fragments, and recovered logs from early exploratory fleets. The reliability of these reports remains contested. However, they serve as the closest surviving testimony regarding first-hand encounters with the species known as the Kinebrach. Each record has been subjected to cross-analysis with corroborating materials from Imperial archives, though many remain partially redacted or officially classified due to the disturbing implications of their content. The first account originates from the fragmentary personal log of Explorator Magos Deltan Vorex, assigned to the Righteous Venture, a vessel operating under the banner of the Explorator Fleet Primus during the late Age of Strife. His log describes an encounter within a derelict orbital ring believed to have once functioned as a Kinebrach trade port. Vorex recorded the discovery of mechanical skeletons fused into walls of alloyed material, their limbs configured in ways inconsistent with known humanoid anatomy. The metal, identified as a rare blend of silicate titanium and psychoreactive crystalline composites, bore the faint residue of psychic interaction. When his servitors attempted to extract a sample, the structure emitted harmonic vibrations that disabled cogitators and induced auditory hallucinations among the organic crew. Several members were found muttering in a repetitive pattern, later identified as a linguistic fragment similar to the Kinebrach trade dialect. Subsequent lines of the log reveal the Magos's gradual loss of logical coherence. His final entry stated that they are still here, inside the machine's reflection, before transmission ceased. When the Righteous Venture was later located adrift by a Mechanicus recovery unit, the entire crew had perished, and the ship's core displayed signs of forced self-termination. Only the Vox recorder endured, its casing lined with strange geometric carvings similar to those once recorded in Iron Warrior's relic caches. The data was sealed under Mechanicus Crypt Level 7, accessible only to select members of the Martian Synod. The second account comes from the records of rogue trader Matthias Jörn, whose vessel Eternum Oath reportedly made contact with a Kinebrach outpost during an early-era expedition beyond the Ghoul Stars. The logs, recovered from a distress buoy centuries later, describe an exchange of goods and information between Jörn's crew and a tall, pallid, iron-limbed race who spoke in trinary tones and moved with mirrored synchronization. The Kinebrach offered devices capable of altering gravitational flow within contained spaces, as well as weapons that appeared to project condensed kinetic energy without visible discharge. Jörn's notes portray the Kinebrach as intelligent but unsettlingly impassive, speaking without visible mouth movement. He observed that their communication appeared to synchronize with the hum of surrounding machinery, suggesting partial mechanical resonance embedded in their biology. The transaction ended abruptly when one of Jörn's lieutenants attempted to examine a Kinebrach containment sphere without authorization. The device reacted violently, fracturing both the man and several nearby servitors. The Kinebrach immediately terminated the trade exchange, disconnecting all Vox channels. Before the Eternum Oath departed, Jörn reported witnessing one Kinebrach remain still before the viewport, motionless except for its mechanical breathing. When the ship engaged warp translation, the cogitator recorded a faint signal echoing from the void, an encoded pulse repeating the phrase, "Trade complete." The meaning remains disputed. A later Imperial record, attributed to an unnamed tech adept assigned to the expeditionary group Lambda Omega 13, provides the only known witness testimony regarding a ground engagement against surviving Kinebrach constructs. The expedition was sent to a ruined world believed to have once housed a Kinebrach fortress complex. Within the remains, the Adepts unit uncovered massive war engines, bipedal walkers with hollowed thoracic cavities. As the Mechanicus attempted reactivation, the constructs reanimated on their own. The Adept describes the ensuing confrontation as precise annihilation. The constructs advance without noise, disassembling servo automata with pinpoint strikes and disrupting Vox signals across the field. The Adept further notes that these machines displayed restraint, focusing exclusively on Mechanicus forces while avoiding organic personnel. When the tech priests attempted to counterattack with plasma fire, the constructs withdrew into the surrounding ruins. The following day, the remains of all Mechanicus personnel were found carefully arranged in circular formation, their cranial augmetics removed and placed at the center of the pattern. No traces of the constructs were ever recovered. The Adept's report was marked unverified, but the incident's coordinates were erased from official Mechanicus star charts soon after. Other witness fragments have surfaced in less formal forms. Among the archives of the Navigator houses, one psychic transcript describes a warp-born vision of metallic beings entombed beneath the bones of dead stars, whispering in the static of reality. The Navigators interpreted this as a residual psychic echo from the Kinebrach's extinction, or possibly from the energy signature of their technological remnants. Such visions were often dismissed as navigational feedback, yet the recurrence of similar imagery across unrelated testimonies hints at a deeper resonance. The aftermath of every confirmed Kinebrach encounter shares consistent features: localized machine failure, cogitator corruption, and the psychological destabilization of nearby organic mines. The Adeptus Mechanicus attributes this to exposure to exotic data forms, self-sustaining code fragments designed to overwrite cognitive patterns. These machine ghosts, as they are colloquially termed, appear to possess an instinct for preservation, targeting any entity attempting to replicate or analyze their designs. One recovered fragment of a Kinebrach databank revealed recursive encryption sequences that resisted all Mechanicus decryption attempts. When forced open, the data core physically degraded into dust within seconds. Administratum after-action analyses have further determined that Kinebrach sites exhibit near-total absence of biological residue. Even when excavations uncovered intact city structures, there were no organic remains, only metallic frames and synthetic tissue strands. This has led to speculation that the species had, by its final evolutionary phase, achieved full cybernetic assimilation, merging consciousness with mechanical architecture. Some theorists within the Mechanicus argue that the Kinebrach may never have truly died. Rather, their neural architectures transitioned into dormant digital strata, embedded within abandoned machinery across the stars. A classified addendum from the Adeptus Mechanicus Magi Historicus makes reference to an echo frequency discovered during deep Auspex scans of derelict Kinebrach ruins. The frequency reportedly aligned with the machine psalms used in certain Iron Warriors Forge rituals. Although this connection remains circumstantial, it raises the possibility that the ancient warband may have inherited or reverse-engineered elements of Kinebrach data design during their alliance. If true, this would explain the Legion's advanced siege automation and unique knowledge of entropic engineering, skills inconsistent with standard Imperial Mechanicus education. The aftermath of the Kinebrach's apparent disappearance remains one of the least understood phenomena in Imperial xenoarchaeology. Entire civilizations once trading with them vanished from record shortly after the species' extinction, as though purged by deliberate intent. Imperial xenologists theorized that the Kinebrach employed a fail-safe mechanism that erased all dependent societies to prevent exploitation of their technology. Others believed that their demise was self-inflicted, the product of an internal schism between those seeking full machine transcendence and those retaining organic identity. Modern Adeptus Mechanicus expeditions continue to uncover remnants of their influence: fragmentary blueprints, unknown alloy compositions, and derelict constructs that appear to react to human presence despite millennia of dormancy. These relics are typically sealed, dismantled, or destroyed under directive from Mars, often without explanation. When questioned, senior tech priests refer to the Kinebrach as an equation that should not be resolved. From the perspective of the Adeptus Administratum, the Kinebrach serve as a cautionary study in technological excess. Their mastery over machine integration achieved wonders that eclipsed even human ingenuity, yet their civilization vanished without trace, leaving behind only silence and malfunction. Administratum scholars note that despite numerous attempts to replicate Kinebrach engineering, every effort has ended in disaster or data corruption, reinforcing the belief that their technology operates under principles incompatible with human understanding. Across all available testimonies, one shared impression endures. The Kinebrach did not die in chaos or decay. Their departure was methodical, precise, and absolute. Every trace of their living presence was replaced with stillness. No ruins aflame, no bodies left behind, only the architecture of function left to fade. Whether this represented extinction or ascension remains unknown. The final Mechanicus transmission concerning the species, logged under Magos archivist Kael'ren's authority, concludes with a single statement. All data suggests that the Kinebrach chose silence over survival. In doing so, they achieved both. The following compilation originates from sealed archives within the Ordo Xenos subdivision of the Inquisition. These records, marked with triple lock encryption sigils and indexed only under the reference Archive 66KI, represent the surviving investigative attempts made by sanctioned inquisitors to study the species known as the Kinebrach. Much of this information was deemed heretical to the Mechanicus and unfit for imperial dissemination. The content herein is drawn from fragmented reports, autopsy logs, psychic transcripts, and memory extractions conducted during the early centuries of the Great Crusade and the later mankind expansion periods. The Inquisition's first official impression of the Kinebrach was one of contradiction. They appeared to have been both builders and destroyers, architects of technology so advanced it bordered on metaphysical, yet seemingly incapable of escaping their own creation's control. The earliest recovered data, acquired from the remnants of an Iron Warriors archive, described them as a proud, rational species who became slaves to the machine spirits they sought to master. This characterization was initially dismissed as Legion-era embellishment until Inquisition investigators began encountering physical evidence that supported the claim. Among the earliest examinations of recovered Kinebrach relics was the Trask incident, classified under Ordo Xenos Level Gamma. The event occurred during the sanctioned excavation of a subterranean chamber beneath the world of Scallum Prime. The chamber contained over 200 suspended constructs resembling humanoid silhouettes made of translucent metal and skeletal circuitry. When the chamber was illuminated by servo-lumen, the constructs activated simultaneously, projecting brief holographic sequences depicting planetary maps and abstract symbols. Within minutes, all visual feeds failed, and every Mechanicus observer present collapsed from neural overload. Upon recovery, each displayed identical retinal burns forming a geometric pattern that later matched Kinebrach data seals recorded in other sites. The Inquisition declared the chamber sealed and purged under plasma sterilization. However, the resulting radiation patterns were found to align perfectly with the star coordinates of the Ghoul Star's region, suggesting the constructs had transmitted a signal before destruction. Subsequent inquisitorial missions reported increasingly anomalous findings. On 3 separate worlds, Erethis Secundus, Vornath and Kalos, investigators uncovered structures identical in design despite being separated by thousands of light years. Each site contained a central pillar composed of a metal with no identifiable atomic structure. The pillars emitted low-frequency vibrations that altered according to proximity of human biosignatures. When psychers were introduced to the area, the frequency increased, inducing vivid hallucinations of mechanical corridors, endless mirrored vaults, and faces made of light. A sanctioned psyker attached to the Kalos expedition described hearing an intelligible voice within the resonance, repeating a phrase later translated from binary logoglyphs as, "We remember you." The Inquisition's reaction was immediate and absolute. All 3 sites were quarantined, and the psyker was executed under suspicion of xenocommunion. The psychic phenomenon, however, did not cease. For weeks afterward, multiple personnel aboard the orbiting cruiser reported hearing the same phrase in their Vox transmissions despite signal isolation. Tech adepts dismantled the communication systems and found no residual frequency anomalies. The phrase nonetheless continued to manifest intermittently across audio records, including those never exposed to external transmissions. The incident remains classified under persistent residual dataform contagion. Ordo Xenos observers came to identify these anomalies as evidence that the Kinebrach's technological network was not fully deactivated. It appeared instead to exist in a dormant but responsive state, reacting selectively to human contact. Several inquisitors hypothesized that the Kinebrach civilization had achieved a form of digital persistence, what some have described as a machine afterlife. Such a theory was deemed blasphemous by the ecclesiarchy and heretical by the Mechanicus, yet multiple Inquisition reports maintained that interaction with Kinebrach relics consistently produced signs of residual intelligence. One analysis even claimed the responses displayed adaptive learning, as if the ancient system was studying its observers. One particularly notable case involved Inquisitor Treller of the Ordo Xenos, who led an investigation into a derelict orbital fortress believed to have once been a Kinebrach outpost. Upon entering the structure, his retinue discovered massive corridors lined with cables resembling ossified nerves. Each cable pulsed faintly, producing rhythmic vibrations at intervals matching a heartbeat. Despite the absence of any active power source, the fortress's systems appeared partially operational. Data scribes noted that their Auspex readings were inconsistent, shifting between mechanical and biological signatures. The Inquisitor ordered a complete data extraction. Within hours, 3 servitors experienced spontaneous cranial detonation, and the fortress's lighting systems began to flicker in synchronization with the team's vocal patterns. According to Treller's own report, the structure listened to them. When the Inquisitor attempted to issue vocal commands, the fortress emitted tones in response, almost conversationally. It was during this exchange that the words Iron Kin were first recorded within the Kinebrach context, appearing as a repeated fragment in the returned signal. The meaning of this term remains under debate, though some scholars suspect it references the Kinebrach's partnership with the Iron Warriors. Before further study could be conducted, the fortress initiated an automated lockdown and began venting its atmosphere. Treller and a single aide escaped through emergency teleportation. All remaining personnel were lost. The site was subsequently designated unsalvageable, and all related data was purged. In the years following, multiple reports surfaced regarding psychic disturbances linked to recovered Kinebrach artifacts. These range from spontaneous cogitator activation to memory distortion among interrogators. One such artifact, recovered from the world of Proxima Ven, was a small cube constructed from overlapping transparent layers of metal. When examined under magnification, the cube revealed thousands of engraved micropatterns forming complex geometric chains. When a lex mechanic attempted to translate the inscriptions into binaric format, he suffered immediate neural hemorrhage. His final words, recorded by Servo Skull, were, "They are still within us." The cube was encased in stasis containment and transferred to a deep Inquisition vault under Ordo Xenos isolation. The most disturbing observation arose from the psychic aftermath of these investigations. Telepathic agents consistently reported sensing a presence linked to Kinebrach relics, something aware, neither hostile nor benign, but observing. This sensation persisted even when the artifacts were removed, suggesting that the act of observation itself established a psychic connection. Some within the Inquisition began referring to this effect as Kinebrach retention, implying that their network extends into the psychic fabric of reality itself. The term was eventually banned after the Ecclesiarchal Council protested its metaphysical implications. Further analysis conducted by the Inquisition's Departamento Obscurus attempted to quantify the anomalies using standardized psychic measurement tools. The results defied conventional categorization. The readings did not align with warp phenomena, but exhibited stable, non-chaotic patterns, indicating an intelligence structured outside the immaterium. In simpler terms, the Kinebrach seemed to have achieved interaction with psychic forces without exposure to the warp. Such mastery, if confirmed, would represent a technological and metaphysical accomplishment unprecedented in known galactic history. Inquisitorial conclusions regarding the Kinebrach remain divided. Some view them as a cautionary example of the dangers of unbounded progress, while others consider them proof of what humanity might one day achieve. The Ordo Xenos majority, however, regards their legacy as an ongoing threat. Several inquisitors have noted the eerie consistency of reports, describing the same three phenomena across every recovered site: mirrored architecture, harmonic resonance, and the sense of being watched. The prevailing interpretation is that the Kinebrach embedded surveillance mechanisms within the very fabric of their structures, possibly to monitor intruders or perhaps to preserve their own memory through those who study them. A final and heavily redacted dossier, retrieved from the sealed archives of Inquisitor Medra Soren, describes an encounter during which an interrogation subject, a rogue archaeologist captured for illicit xenotrade, claimed to have heard the Kinebrach while within one of their ruins. His statement, recorded under psychometric observation, is transcribed as follows: "They do not speak in words. They move in the echoes of sound and light. They show you your own reflection, but it isn't you. It's them, looking back through you. They want to understand what became of us. I think they remember the Iron Ones. I think they want them back." The subject expired moments later from unexplained cerebral liquefaction. No warp energy traces were detected. The Inquisition has since issued standing orders that all recovered Kinebrach technology is to be incinerated, not studied. Any personnel exhibiting persistent auditory hallucinations, mirrored visual anomalies, or recurring dreams involving metallic structures are to be executed without delay. Despite this directive, the phenomenon has not ceased. Several Inquisition stations continue to report sporadic data intrusions, messages formed of overlapping binary phrases, always containing the same closing sequence. Observation continues. The Inquisition's investigation into the Kinebrach's wartime history was never intended for open dissemination. Official records of their military involvement exist only in fragments, reconstructed through forbidden cross-referencing between Ordo Xenos databanks, suppressed Mechanicus archives, and lost administratum ledgers dating from the Unification Wars to the Great Crusade. Even so, these fragments tell a story that resists linear logic. The wars involving the Kinebrach are remembered not through victory or defeat, but through the erasure that followed their participation. The first mention of a Kinebrach battle anomaly appears in a classified campaign file recovered from an Iron Warriors tactical archive. It details a siege fought on an unregistered world referred to only as Obsidian Theta. The report begins conventionally: terrain analysis, fortification schematics, expected resistance patterns. Then the documentation diverges. The enemy fortifications, originally described as silicate and concrete, later became self-correcting. Artillery barrages left no lasting impact. Craters reformed, trenches sealed. Vox intercepts from within the Iron Warriors' ranks mention walls that breathe and structures that learn. The final surviving entry is an encrypted data fragment attributed to a warsmith overseeing the assault. It reads, "We fight the world itself. The enemy does not stand before us. It is what we stand on." No further communication from that company was ever received. The administratum later purged Obsidian Theta from star charts. When a later Imperial reconnaissance probe was dispatched centuries afterward, it located no planetary mass at the recorded coordinates. The second incident, catalogued by Ordo Xenos archivists under designation Case File 77 Kinebrach, recounts a conflict between a pre-Imperial human civilization and an unidentified xenoforce believed to have included Kinebrach war engines. The records were translated from ancient data slabs unearthed on the world of Holmes Reach. The tablets describe machines with humanoid proportions standing twice the height of a battle tank, operating without visible pilots. Their weapons did not discharge bolts or plasma, but pulses of colourless light that bent metal as though reprogramming it on contact. The defenders' vehicles reportedly melted into featureless shapes, their weapon barrels folding inward as if the metal itself rejected its intended purpose. The chronicler of the battle, a planetary archivist whose name is long lost, wrote of hearing a rhythm that guided the movement of the enemy constructs, each motion perfectly synchronized. As the battle continued, the rhythm grew audible even to those who had fled underground. entire communication networks collapsed into static that pulsed in identical cadence. When the silence finally returned, the archivist recorded that all light had vanished from the horizon, leaving behind what he described as a mirror laid over the world. The site remains untraceable, though Mechanicus cartographers have noted recurring Auspex interference across several nearby sectors, consistent with residual machine code resonance. A later sealed transcript, recovered from the Inquisition's Ordo Hereticus auxiliary vaults, provides a disturbing counterpoint. The document recounts a skirmish during the early Great Crusade between the forces of the 4th Legion and a remnant faction allegedly using Kinebrach-designed weapons. The conflict occurred on a nameless forge world whose coordinates are now classified. The Iron Warriors advanced to neutralize the enemy, expecting conventional resistance. Instead, they encountered silence. When contact was re-established with the forward cohort, its Vox officers reported seeing their own reflections advancing toward them, armor, insignia, and movements identical. The mirrored soldiers did not bleed when struck, but emitted bursts of white static. Within minutes, both sides vanished from Auspex detection. Following the engagement, the Mechanicus dispatched recovery servitors to the area. They found no corpses, only armor fragments, each reversed in molecular polarity. When the fragments were reassembled for study, they produced a mirrored replica of standard Iron Warriors plate, accurate down to microscopic etching. The Mechanicus sealed the findings under decree of technological quarantine. The Inquisition later intervened, transferring the data into restricted archive Theta Black. The name of the Forge World was redacted from all subsequent records. Another anomaly was documented during the Heroes Heresy, though few within the Imperium are permitted to know it. Reports from Loyalist reconnaissance units describe a battlefield where the laws of reality appeared inconsistent. The environment shimmered between states of ruin and preservation, as though time itself had fractured. Within the distortion, witnesses claimed to see towering figures of glass and metal observing the conflict without interference. They did not act, nor did they bleed when struck. One legionnaire described them as the audience of the dead. The effect dissipated only after the battle concluded, leaving behind nothing but melted terrain glassed smooth across kilometers. For decades, the Inquisition dismissed these accounts as post-battle stress phenomena, until repeated analysis revealed that energy residue from the distortion matched the known frequency of Kinebrach artifacts. Attempts to replicate the readings in controlled conditions resulted in catastrophic cogitator failures. The Ordo Xenos eventually concluded that the Kinebrach had developed a means to manipulate environmental structure through data resonance, altering the material world by rewriting its atomic code in real time. If true, this would explain the impossible consistency of their architecture and the self-repairing nature of their fortifications. It would also suggest that no true Kinebrach corpse has ever been found because their physical existence was never singular. It was distributed, shared across the constructs and the landscape itself. The Inquisition's deeper investigations yielded even stranger results. A sealed report known as the Halleck's Memorandum describes an incident in which Imperial forces engaged a Kinebrach-derived construct during a purge operation in the Ghoul Stars. The entity, described as a mechanical sentinel of humanoid form, stood immobile at the heart of an ancient structure. When approached, it emitted a faint vibration that triggered mass interference across all recording devices. Servitors began repeating words in binaric code despite lacking the necessary vocal systems. Voxcasters broadcast voices of long-dead commanders, while Auspex readings displayed impossible negative distances, measurements suggesting that parts of the structure existed inside itself. When the Inquisitor leading the operation ordered its destruction, the Sentinel simply vanished, not exploded, not displaced, gone, as if erased from the causal sequence. The Mechanicus accompanying the team later confirmed that its mass could not have been teleported. Instead, all records of its existence were overwritten at the data level of surrounding cogitators. Only the human memories remained, and even those degraded within weeks. The Inquisition eventually sealed the report under psychic containment, fearing the data's potential contagion. The most heavily restricted Kinebrach-related file, Report Sigma Infinite, details what appears to be the final confirmed interaction between the Imperium and remnants of their influence. During an inquisitorial-led reclamation of a derelict void station, investigators encountered what they initially believed to be an empty hall filled with derelict machinery. Within moments of activation, however, the machinery began projecting overlapping holographic silhouettes, ghostly armies locked in silent combat. The battle unfolded repeatedly in perfect precision, each cycle identical to the last, with no audio and no apparent participants. When investigators attempted to interfere, the projection shifted to include them in its choreography, duplicating their every move in delay of one heartbeat. Psychers on site reported extreme distress, describing the sensation of being mirrored across time. Several collapsed, claiming that the projections were not illusions but echoes of actual wars fought across different temporal layers. The Mechanicus later confirmed that the holographic field generated measurable gravitational distortions, meaning the phenomenon was at least partially physical. The field collapsed when the Inquisitor ordered the destruction of the central power node, though residual motion continued to flicker in the air long after. In the aftermath, one data slate survived, its contents a partial reconstruction of battle telemetry. The file contained names of human military divisions dating from the Dark Age of technology, alongside design schematics consistent with Kinebrach aesthetics. The implication was clear but unrecorded. Humanity may not have merely encountered the Kinebrach, but once fought alongside or against them, long before the Imperium's rise. The Inquisition immediately sealed the document and ordered all witnesses terminated. The official record lists the void station as destroyed due to structural instability. Other sealed Inquisition reports refer to ghost fleets appearing in regions once known to House Kinebrach colonies, formations of ships with no active signatures, drifting in perfect alignment, transmitting faint binary messages decoded only as recall incomplete. Attempts to trace their origin result in navigational error or complete system loss. These fleets appear only briefly before fading from detection, as though never truly present. The Inquisition interprets them as spectral replays of long-past conflicts, recorded within the fabric of the void itself. The Mechanicus, when questioned, refuses to acknowledge their existence. Every encounter, every anomaly, every report ends in silence. There are no surviving battle trophies, no corpses, and no decisive conclusions. Only the sensation that each investigation awakens something dormant. The pattern is consistent. A moment of contact, an observation, a reaction from the environment, and then erasure. Inquisitorial investigators note that even the act of recording seems to provoke interference. Documents degrade faster than expected, and data backups corrupt with phrases that mirror previous warnings. Observation continues. For this reason, all Kinebrach War records have been sealed indefinitely under the Abyssal Directive. No further excavations are authorized, and any attempts to recover or reconstruct Kinebrach battle data are to be classified as techno-heresy of the highest order. Yet despite these prohibitions, rumors persist that some Inquisitors still seek the truth. They claim that the Kinebrach did not vanish from war, they simply changed its form. Their armies may not march, but their reflections linger in every machine that learns, every weapon that calculates, and every echo of signal that repeats after transmission ends. The following section was drawn from restricted archives within the Ordo Xenos vaults on Terra, compiled under the designation Red Data File, Kinebrach. Access to this record requires dual authorization from a senior Inquisitor and a Magos biologist of rank Primus or higher. Its contents were deemed too volatile for public dissemination, though several redacted summaries were circulated to the Adeptus Mechanicus centuries later for cross-reference with known Dark Age of technology remnants. Within these sealed compilations, the earliest record dates back to the 31st millennium. A fleet belonging to the explorator arm of the Adeptus Mechanicus had stumbled upon a void sector marked by faint stellar distortions. Within, a derelict outpost was found, its architecture unlike any known xenos or human design. The walls were embedded with crystalline veins pulsing faintly with residual energy. Subsequent analysis revealed a lattice similar to quantum data streams, a biological structure storing fragments of information. The Mechanicus team discovered glyphs resembling binary cant but of a more primal structure, containing layered loops of command syntax. When translated partially, the text described core entities of thought-forged will. These findings were later connected to the Kinebrach, implying that even in their absence, their constructs continued to emit faint echoes of machine-like cognition. Further within the file is the Karthos sub-report, detailing a planet once thought to have housed a minor outpost of the Kinebrach. The world was barren, with high radiation levels and metallic dunes stretching for hundreds of kilometers. Scattered across the surface were colossal metallic vertebrae, segments of unknown origin. Scans indicated the remains had once contained dense energy nodes, possibly components of an integrated machine organism. Analysis concluded that these were not vehicles in the conventional sense, but rather biomechanical entities that served as both transport and defense for the Kinebrach. Each vertebra was believed to contain a sentient subcore that acted in networked coordination with others, implying a distributed form of intelligence. The discovery caused great concern among the Magi present. The Kinebrach had apparently fused biology, machine, and psychic resonance into a singular function, a concept the Mechanicus found both fascinating and heretical. The second file, designation Theta 9 Red, recorded findings from a black ship assigned to intercept anomalous transmissions near the galactic fringe. The signals were rhythmic, non-random, and contained a repeating modulation that matched ancient Kinebrach communication patterns as noted in archived Mechanicus lexicons. When the black ship triangulated the origin point, it found nothing, only empty void. Yet, as they recorded the signal, several crew members began experiencing intense auditory hallucinations. They claimed to hear a lattice of voices speaking through one another. Psychers aboard the vessel collapsed, their minds overloaded by what was later classified as a resonant cognitive field. It was theorized that some fragment of the Kinebrach's data architecture persisted across time, operating like a vast, dormant network echoing through subspace. The report was sealed under Inquisitorial Order Theta 9 with the closing note: their extinction may not be absolute. The Kinebrach may persist in waveform, not flesh. A particularly concerning entry was discovered in a cross-analysis between the Ordo Xenos and Ordo Malleus. An inquisitor of the latter, studying demon-possessed machinery from the Forge World Vextrix, found energetic similarities between the possessed engines and recovered Kinebrach artifacts. The Inquisitor postulated that the Kinebrach's mastery of machine symbiosis may have drawn attention from entities within the warp. Their use of psychic resonance fields, integrated with their machinery, could have inadvertently opened pathways between the material and immaterial realms. It is theorized that the fall of the Kinebrach may not have been entirely due to external war, but the uncontrolled corruption of their own technologies. The line between artificial and demonic became indistinguishable, leading to a cascading mental infection across their networked machines. Among the most heavily classified files is redacted manuscript 7Q, found within the personal archive of Inquisitor Lord Caden of the Ordo Xenos. The manuscript describes a forbidden experiment conducted by a Mechanicus splinter sect. They attempted to reawaken a fragment of Kinebrach technology, recovered from a buried vault beneath the planet Distramos 7. The artifact was described as a core crystal, a geometrically perfect dodecahedron that emitted low-frequency pulses of psychic energy. When connected to an isolated power matrix, it activated briefly, generating holographic projections of unknown star systems and mathematical symbols. Within moments, the machine's control units began reconfiguring themselves, forming recursive symbols on their own metallic surfaces. The chamber's servitors reportedly began speaking in unison, repeating a single phrase: "Unity of thought restored." The test was immediately terminated by inquisitorial decree. The crystal was sealed and relocated to an undisclosed vault. The Mechanicus personnel involved were either mind-wiped or executed, depending on rank and degree of exposure. The Inquisitor's concluding note stated, "The Kinebrach are not gone. Their thought persists in the language of machines. To awaken them is to surrender the right to individuality." The final entries of this chapter shift tone, from analysis to warning. A recurring phrase across multiple Inquisition reports reads, "They were too close to perfection." This line appears in context describing civilizations that reached a level of technological or psychic integration exceeding human understanding. The implication is that perfection, when achieved by mortal intellect, attracts annihilation, either through self-destruction or through the intervention of the warp. The Kinebrach, in their pursuit of harmonious synthesis between metal, mind, and spirit, may have inadvertently erased the boundary between consciousness and mechanism. Some Inquisitors maintain that remnants of their technology still exist, buried within Mechanicus data vaults, disguised as relics of the Dark Age. Others whisper that the machine god's true form, as worshipped by the cult Mechanicus, may have originated from Kinebrach design philosophy. The Inquisition, however, maintains silence. When questioned about such theories, the official response remains consistent. No comment, the matter is under observation. In the last sealed memorandum dated Millennia 41, year 611, an Ordo Xenos observer summarized the Kinebrach legacy with clinical detachment. His statement reads, "The Kinebrach demonstrate the fundamental paradox of sentient progress. To control matter, one must first control thought. To perfect thought, one must merge it with the machine. But in that merger, identity dissolves. They became what we seek to emulate and what we fear to become. We monitor their echoes not for curiosity but for caution. The Kinebrach remind us that the line between evolution and erasure is one and the same." Thus ends the Inquisition's compiled assessment of the Kinebrach, a species long extinct, yet still haunting the mechanisms of the galaxy through faint residual codes and corrupted echoes. Their disappearance remains a case study in ambition without restraint, intelligence without humility, and unity without individuality. No further analysis has been authorized.